Hi, bro. We're gonna start. If you want to wrap up your conversation. Thank you all so much for coming. This is the fifth homeschool talk of 2018. Hi, Megan. And the 12th or 11th homeschool engagement overall this year. We've had some non-talk engagements, like some field days and stuff. I want to thank YU for hosting, as well as PNCA for facilitating this with homeschool. Um, Victoria, my collaborator with homeschool, couldn't do it without her. And of course, the most thanks to Alexandria and the audience. So the PNCA low-res folks asked me to announce that after this event, there's a low-res MFA opening at third space, 707 Northeast Broadway, number 205. And it's a show curated by Nicole Baker and Kalijah Mallory. It's called Expanded Cinema, featuring D.B. Amaran, Nicole Baker, Christina Smirnos, Rachel Wolf, Jennifer Yarakis, sorry if I butchered that, and more. So yeah, check that out. It starts at 7. We'll probably wrap up here around 7, so you can just leisurely make your way over there. Northeast is very close. But yeah, the main event is Alexandria's talk, mapping the legacy of the marvelous, use of the Afro-Surreal from West Africa and across the Atlantic. This talk is presented in collaboration with the Low Residency MFA in Visual Studies at PNCA. And fundamentally, so the talk is fundamentally motivated by philosophical and artistic contributions rooted in the African diaspora. And it examines the role that visual language and surrealist discourse have played in Alexandria's practice. Alexandria Regu is a visual artist and independent curator. At her core, Alexandria is most passionate about reimagining 21st century possibilities for creative practice through service and support structures that promote sustainability and accessibility for artists, as well as communities engaging the arts. As an artist, the practice has illuminated pathways globally, nationally, as well as throughout the Midwest. She's held fellowships with Acre in Steuben, Wisconsin, Patch Projects, Stony Island Arts Bank in Chicago, the Center for Afrofuture Studies in Iowa City, Independent Curators International in New Orleans, New York, and Martinique, and the Camargo Foundation / Street Arts Residency in France. Among her curatorial projects are Du Monde Noir, an artistically run collective which seeks to identify contemporary evidence of surrealist activity produced by visual artists and writers of the African diaspora in the U.S. and abroad. Forthcoming projects include Oh Heavenly Father, Mother Ocean, and Cosmic Seed, her solo show at Ditch Projects in Eugene, Oregon. Obviously, we all live in Oregon. We're going to go see that show. Maybe you'll be there?
Yeah.
Awesome. I met Alexandria at PNCA. We did 2 performances at the beginning of the low residency program. And I was really blown away by what she discussed and the work that she showed. So I'm just really excited that she's here to give this talk. Thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Alexandria.
All right, y'all. So I have 78 slides to get through, and I'm going to try to do that in an hour. Can everyone read the quote up here, or is it a bit difficult? We're good? Okay.
About as big as we can go.
Let's take about a minute just to go through this, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same. Sure.
The conditions of what people call quote-unquote global modernity are fundamentally made up by settler colonialism. Understanding that settler colonialism is an inter-European affair, and also understanding that the transatlantic slave trade and the emergence of a set of philosophical formulations that essentially provide for us some modern conception of self that has as its basis a kind of possessive, heteronormative, patriarchal individuation. That's what it is to be a self on the most fundamental level, that these constitute the basis of our modernity. But for most of the people who live in the world, actually for everybody who lives in the world, although most of the people who live in the world are actually able to both recognize this and say this, that modernity is a social and ecological disaster that we live, that we now attempt to survive. And if we take that up, then part of what's at stake is that we recognize the feminist and queer interventions against heteronormative patriarchy, that Black interventions against the theory and practice of slavery, which is ongoing, that indigenous interventions against settler colonialism constitute the general, both practical and intellectual basis for not only our own attempts to survive, but also our attempts to save the earth. And I'll put it in the terms that the great poet Ed Robertson puts it, not just to save the earth, but to see the earth before the end of the world. And this is an emergency that we're in now, and it's urgent. Quote from Fred Moten in conversation with Robin D.G. Kelly at the University of Toronto through the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design in the Mastery of Visual Studies per seminar series, April 2017.
So, my work is fortified by personal alchemy, elements of nature, surrealist discourse, and research rooted in West African culture and tradition. My training comes from a background in performance and fiber material studies, as well as teaching and curation. For those of you who don't know, I was raised between Chicago, Illinois, and Ames, Iowa. So I'm a Midwesterner through and through, by my two parents, Erica and Chicago West Sider, former veteran, and Obina Arebu, an Igbo Nigerian immigrant and retired track and field athlete. What I'm going to share with you all this evening are a few things. Some definitions from key concepts that will help guide us through this lecture, mainly the four principles of the practice of poetry and the marvelous. I'll also be sharing with you my continued research, mostly in quote form and image form, as it relates to the intersections between African art and surrealist practices. And closer to the end, we'll see a round of recent projects. The Yoruba people of Nigeria have an ancient saying, Ayel, Oja, Oranile. The physical world is a marketplace, heaven is home. Oftentimes, when we think of heaven, it is contextualized as a place that is out of reach and only accessible through some form of death or afterlife. This saying begs the question, how then am I as an artist rendering that which is invisible? How might I bring to the surface elements of the subconscious, the deep ocean of mystery, or creative source? How then do I bring form to that which is hardly known? A sub-question to these thoughts becomes the concept of activation. How do we initiate the subconscious intuition or that which remains to be concealed? Across the continent of Africa, motion and movement have been fundamental beliefs to awakening that of the unknown. Consequently, movement, rhythm, motion, circularity have also been contributing components to my artistic explorations within my creative practice. I also just want to mention too that this idea of rendering the invisible is a key concept that is a through line throughout surrealist discourse as well. Chike Tideng Sila, in his essay Surrealism and Black African Art, addresses the significance of initiations in African culture and acknowledges the uses of mysticism and frequent development of psychic space to reveal aspects of the unknown to the lived experience. In his essay on Black art and surrealism, he writes, in the ecologically balanced tribes of Africa, the surrealist spirit is deeply embedded by social tradition. The mysticism prevalent in all Black African philosophy presupposes a highly charged psychic world in which every individual agrees to forget themselves in order to concentrate on the least known instances of the mind's movement, a thoroughly emancipatory experience. The psychic world, wrongfully qualified as fictitious, is a superior transcendence of the real functioning of thought over ordinary reality, something that vulgar materialists can never perceive. He also goes on to explain the use of ritual ceremonies, which I'll talk a little bit about after I play this video, and how the initiation is used to communicate a language of inspiration. The initiation, which announces
You're still projecting?
I am still projecting. I'm about to play the video. The initiation, which announces the beginning of new existence in Africa, not only fortifies the child mentally and emotionally, but also prepares the child for social and cultural balance through a series of cyclical physical tests. Affective ties to the natural world are the lifeblood of this exploration of the marvelous, and the heightening and deepening of these ties open to the road of poetry. You'll see in a moment in this video that I'm about to play um, the way that Nigerian author Ben Okri details the process of which the Ibiku or spirit children enter the earth. I'm going to play a little bit from you this piece that I titled Black Object, White Smoke, which narrates this experience of initiation.
In the beginning there was a river. The river became a road, and the road branched out to the whole world. And because the road was once a river, it was always hungry. In that land of beginnings, spirits mingled with the unborn. We could assume numerous forms. Many of us were birds. We knew no boundaries. There was much feasting, playing, and sorrowing. We feasted much because of the beautiful terrors of eternity, because we were free. And we sorrowed much because there were always those amongst us who had just returned from the world of the living. They had returned inconsolable for all the love they had left behind, all the suffering they hadn't redeemed, and all that they hadn't understood, and for all that they had barely begun to learn before they were drawn back to the land of their origin. There was not one amongst us who looked forward to being born. We disliked the rigors of existence, the unfulfilled longings, the enshrined injustices of the world, the labyrinths of love, the ignorance of parents, the fact of dying, and the amazing indifference of the living in the midst of the simple beauties of the universe. We feared the heartlessness of human beings, all of whom are born blind, few of whom ever learn to see. Always those amongst us turned from the world. With our spirit companions, the ones with whom we had a special affinity, we were happy.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, we're all very familiar with tech issues.
Most of the time because we floated on the aquamarine air of love. We played with the fauns, the fairies, and the beautiful beings. Tender sibyls, benign spirits, and the serene presences of our ancestors were always with us, bathing us in the radiance of their diverse rainbows. There are many reasons why babies cry when they are born, and one of them is the sudden separation from the world of pure dreams, where all things are made of enchantment, and where there is no suffering. The happier we were, the closer was our birth. As we approached another incarnation, we made pacts that we would return to the spirit world at the first opportunity. We made these vows in fields of intense flowers and in the sweet-tasting moonlight of the world. Those of us who made such vows were known among the living as Abiku, spirit children. And not wanting to stay we caused much pain to our mothers. Their pain grew heavier with each return. Their anguish became for us an added spiritual weight which quickens the cycle of rebirth. Each new birth was agony for us too, each shock of the raw world. Our cyclical rebellion made us resented by other spirits and ancestors. Disliked in the spirit world and branched amongst the living, our willingness to stay affected all kinds of balances. Not all people recognized us. We were the ones who kept coming and going, unwilling to come to terms with life. We had the ability to will our deaths. Our pacts were binding. Those who broke our pacts were assailed by hallucinations and haunted by their companions. They would only find when they returned to the world of the unborn, the place of fountains, where their loved ones would be waiting for them silently. Those of us who lingered in the world, seduced by the annunciation of wonderful events, went through life with beautiful and faded eyes, carrying with us the music of a lovely and tragic mythology. Our mouths utter obscure prophecies. Our minds are invaded by images of the future. We are the strange ones, with half of our beings always in the spirit world. These are the myths of the beginnings. These are stories and moods deep in those who are seated in rich lands who still believe in mysteries. I was born not just because I had conceived a notion to stay, but because in between my becoming and going, the great cycles of time had finally tightened around my neck. I prayed for laughter, a life without hunger. I was answered with paradoxes. It remains an enigma how it came to be that I was born smiling.
So, back to the presentation. I kind of like the idea of reading quotes out loud. Could I get maybe another volunteer just to read out loud for me? Slide.
Marvelous. Sounding great, clever, extraordinary.
Thanks. When it comes to my studio practice, I believe that my research has been a significant factor in not only just the development of my work, but also the expansion of my perception of possibilities of what art can do. To a large degree, my art is informed by who I am and my experience as an individual, a child, a daughter, a sister, and a member of community. The following slides have helped me to articulate the ways in which my Black American culture and Nigerian heritage have influenced my interpretation of the role that the artist plays in society, textiles, performativity, and our collective connectivity to the rest of the natural world. Got another big one. I can read it too. It's homeschool, so.
I can read it, but I don't want.
Man is merely the world in the sphere of subconscious practice by cultivating his difference, not isolate himself, but on the contrary, reaches out in a way to people and things without. Tree has access to the world not through the external, but through its inner being, its roots. Man, the communicating paths to the world, also necessarily bridge thinking him to the world. Our only access to the world is through ourselves. All other paths lead to abstract appearance, to transcendental illusion or pretend. We penetrate the reality of people and things in proportion to how profoundly we penetrate ourselves. The depths and complexities of the world we explore projections or products of us. The work of art cannot exist without sensory contact with the world, contact which is possible only as through the Expression of the whole is individually attached to expression of itself. The name and the name.
So I spend a lot of time looking at maps and diagrams that just really help me organize my chaotic mind. And um, I think a few of these diagrams that I showed kind of help articulate the way in which I am thinking about just my sensory experience in the world and the way in which these pathways to kind of provoking or evoking spirit or soul. So this is just a little found on the internet called The Threefold Nature of Man. And one of the things that I really like is how the map sort of has four components to it: the body and these pathways into the Holy Spirit through our five senses, right? And hearing being the central pathway to memory, and also sort of the core or nuclei of the Holy Spirit. I also, in the last 2 years of my research, have been examining the philosophical and worldviews from the Igbo people of Nigeria, where my ancestors are from, which have played a major role in my understanding of spirit as well, life and death, the world and the universe, and my finding of place amongst it. I particularly appreciate this diagram for Colbert Cole's book, Igbo Arts, Community, and Cosmos, which breaks down human existence into four parts, essentially. It has the individual, family, it goes into village and village group. And then from there, you can kind of see after death at the very bottom, the many different lines sort of lead you to different experiences, maybe reincarnations, purgatories, if you will, that are believed within the culture. Similarly, I look at the arc of my own artistic practice as the exploration of creation or source through three realms. First being self, the second being family, and the third being community. A couple of other things that are really important to me are I spend a lot of time reading nerdily on cosmology. And so part of this research kind of also entails understanding a little bit deeper about what the different planets and stars sort of, how they influence us here on Earth. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the representation of the sun and the symbolism of the moon, because traditionally in cosmology, these are manifestations of what is perceived as masculine versus feminine energy. I'm totally comfortable with people sort of like challenging that, but I'm just talking about sort of the tradition of the origin of things. So I'm going to share this with you all, and then we'll continue to go from there. The sun's glyph, a circle with a dot in the center, signifies the emanation of light, i.e. life-giving energy from the unlimited sources of divinity. The circle is a symbol for infinity, while the dot is the point of light, which is sent forth from the source. Man is a manifestation of the creative aspect of this dot. In short, the sun's symbols reveals the divine origin and shows man the unlimited possibility of growth, which can be achieved through the conscious attunement of the dot of divinity within each being. This excerpt comes from Alan Oken's essay on symbolism, mythology, and history of the sun from his book Eyes Above Sohula. If the circle of the sun represents the infinite and unmanifested source of energy for the entire universe and each human being, then the semicircle of the moon reveals the finite and manifested. The moon absorbs the light and heat emanating from the sun's rays and gives it creative force form. The moon, therefore, is emblematic of all that is receptive in human nature, the subconscious, the emotions, and the behavioral instincts. In short, the moon is the soul, while the sun is considered the spirit. Earlier, I've been looking at ways in which this shows up within traditional African textiles. So these are a few examples of cloth that are coming from the Congo. It's called tuba cloth. Two forms of it. One that is partaken mostly by men of the community or men of the tribe and the women of the tribe. So you can see sort of the distinctions here on the right, where the male cloth is a bit more ordered and graphic in terms of design. The feminine cloth or the female cloth is more on the intuitive, kind of chaotic, doesn't have necessarily a deliberate pattern, but definitely seems deliberate in terms of the placement of these different symbols. It's pretty consistent throughout this practice or tradition of creating this textile. Here's another example of the masculine and feminine cloths. So on the bottom we have the male, on the top we have the Oh yeah. So on the subject of technology and advancement, this book, African Fractals, Modern Computing and Indigenous Design, has been helping me with understanding the uses of math inspired by nature and social formations to create design and art as well as daily life. So I've been looking at this particularly in the formation of traditional Igbo hairstyles, as well as photography of these hairstyles. So this is J.D. Okare, the Nigerian photographer. There's some other examples as well. So now we're entering the bit more of the personal, which I spoke of sort of my conceptualization of home or understanding of the source coming from self, family, and community. And we have another quote. So I'll read this. But the conquest of the physical world is not only man's only duty. They, he, she, they are also enjoined to conquer the great wilderness of themselves. The precise role of the artist then is to illuminate that darkness, blaze roads through the vast forest, so that we will not, in all our doing, lose sight of its purpose, which is, after all, to make the world a more human dwelling place. I kind of want to change human to humane, but this is a quote from James Baldwin's essay on the creative process, which I would totally encourage you all to read. So diving into this, the wilderness of oneself, a huge part of my process involves following a trail of symbols, stories, etymologies, origin stories, and images of the past, reimagining my own personal mythology and envisioning how these mythologies or dreamscapes of the present self might exist in the future. This is a photograph of me and my sister back in the day. I don't think this was Halloween. It was some just costume type day at school back in Ames, Iowa. And I found it so interesting, our strikingly different choices of how we wanted to represent ourselves for this day. I am totally decked to the nines in my Nigerian garb, while my sister she wanted to be a Barbie cheerleader. I'm thinking of how we are to this day, and I feel as though things have kind of maybe switched. Like, I was a cheerleader. I did cheerleading in high school, and now she climbs trees and forests land and stuff. So it's hilarious to me. These are also just some clippings. This is a family portrait. My father, my mother, me and my sister when we were kids. My name is Alexandria, so I'm constantly thinking about the source of that, where that name comes from. This is a discuss of, I guess, the asshole Alexander the Great. You know, he was a conqueror, but I think he also contributed some really incredible things to culture and society. So I think about that in terms of just expansion of knowledge, the depths and expense and willingness that we are deciding to go for sort of whatever we consider to be progression. Um, he's just an interesting figure to me. And then this other clipping is a newspaper clipping from back in the day when my dad was competing in track and field. He was very successful. I guess this was from 1992, just a year after I was born. But he, by the time he was my age, had toured all over the world. He still holds he's in the top 5 in the furthest jumps back home in Nigeria. He's been inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so this idea or notion of legacy is something that I'm thinking a lot about too. Furthermore, I just wanted to kind of briefly mention this connection between Nigerian culture and Greek culture. And this tribe that I'm, for whatever reason, really attached to, the Ijagam leopard mine, and the sign of greatness. My name, again, Alexandria, is after Alexander the Great. There's just some excerpts within here that sort of articulate the love that both the Ijagam and the Greek people have for the art of love and war. So for the Ijagam people, there's definitely an affinity for horticulture, plants, flowers. There's an affinity for performance, but there's also an affinity and love for physical exertion and physical self-realization through hunting and different sort of sporting events. So this dualism between nature and the body is something that's followed me everywhere that I've gone. Before I just made the decision to become an artist, I was participating mostly in sports, kind of as the firstborn, and trying to follow in my father's footsteps, I guess, to like make him happy. But I gave that up my final year before I graduated high school. So I just wanted to include a couple more images of my family. I think a lot about the contributions that I've received from both sides of my parents. On one end, the textile and performative traditions that have been passed down to me. This is the images of the Ijagam Leopard Society men parading or doing their procession within probably Nigeria or Cameroon, not sure. But these textiles that they are wearing are called Bukar cloth, which is entirely hand stitched and then dyed in indigo. And this is a huge process, a major process that I'm working with right now. Here's another example of it. While on my mother's end, what she sort of passed down to me, what the matriarchs on her side passed down to me, was this tradition more so in quilting. So this is actually an image of my mother with her 2 cousins, Jason and Andre, and these are actually my great-great-grandmothers, but her great-grandparents. They were both quilters. This is Mama's quilt on her lap. And I believe because they're all wearing relatively similar patterns that somebody probably made those shirts that the kids are wearing. This was the home that my great-grandparents held in Chicago in Garfield Park for over 4 decades. That was definitely a gathering site for all of us and probably one of my earliest encounters with people with artistic practice. So in addition to my great-great-grandmothers, my great-grandmother was also a quilter, and she's the one who taught me how to sew. My great-grandfather was a photographer. He built a darkroom in the basement of this house, and a couple of my uncles also practiced art in some form. My great-uncle was a photographer as well. And my uncle Michael, he was the one that I was most inspired by. He passed away back
in 2002 or 2003, but I would say he's also one of the reasons why I wanted to become an artist. Like he was just very gifted at whatever it was that he touched, and it really inspired me as a kid. Yeah, I might need somebody to read this. My throat's getting a little dry.
Historical existence of Africa and her scattered children, the tragedy and transformation. These form the material and hence spiritual essence of ourselves. The whole of our story retold and foretold, modern tales and old. Art is the life of people, society, and nature. The theme is always our real lives in actual society, as unbelievably complex and dialectical as they are. Creativity is the basis of evolution. The very broken quality, almost to abstraction, is a function of change and transition. It is as though the whole world we inhabit rests on the bottom of the ocean, harnessed by memory, language, and image, to that railroad of human bones at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Amir Baraka.
And this is from his essay, Henry Dumas' Afro-Surrealist Expressionist. So I thought about this quote mainly in connection to this tradition of quilting that has flourished throughout Southern America through the G-Span Collective. So I added a couple of images of which at some point I would love to take photographs of my great-grandmother's quilts, but this is a group of women who also deeply inspire me. And I'm thinking constantly about the connections between this work to what we saw earlier with the Ijagan people, kind of the dizzying effect, even though it's two-tone, the way that sort of here, the pinwheel is translated, even in 1955, when this practice, I don't even know how far it dates back, but it's old. So just thinking about that memory and how memory is retained through artistic practice, this definitely kind of resembles the Ghanaian kente cloth, the rhythmic sort of textiles that come from that area. So I think I want to read this out loud just to kind of get us thinking a little bit more about the subject of surrealism and how African art kind of interweaves itself within this discourse. Instead of the alienating dualistic intellectualization that usually defines the headlines of European social practice, Black Africans usually enjoy the presence of the practice of poetry throughout the totality of their traditional social life. In Africa, that is, the living experience of the surreality had since prehistoric times enjoyed supremacy over its theoretical justification. Within the Western world, however, surrealism is the result of a long philosophical, political, scientific, and poetic struggle to recover what the traditional African has never lost. Against all forms of indifference and misery, surrealism and Black African art remain irreducible examples in the development of the complete unfettering of the mind. Surrealism and Black African art show that history's last step, the step beyond history, coincides with the return to first principles, which is also a return to primordial glory, involving nothing less than the systematic and definitive liberation of the whole of human society and of nature. This is another quote from my boy Chike. So kind of within that realm, as we're talking about the lived experience of surreality within African art, I've been doing a lot of research on this particular sculpture. It's called the Ijele Mask, which is performed throughout the southeastern Nigerian region. It represents the nature and the cosmos and the man's sort of connectivity do both of these things. Traditionally, within these maps, they are usually between the scale of 6 to 8 feet tall. They're commissioned within the village, usually honoring some of the past. Um, they take usually a month to make by a local tailor and applique process, and are made only once every 10 to 25 years. Each mask, though, although fluctuating in resemblance, always has the same components: 4 quadrants, clock figures of local leaders in the community, tassels, and a stuffed python, which illustratively symbolizes the messages and the connectivity between heaven and earth.
That's the python on the middle.
Yeah, that's it. This is the python here, above those tassels, and then yeah, that yellow kind of line, that's the python. So some of you are still kind of maybe wondering what exactly is this practice of poetry that keeps coming up. So within his introduction of Revolution in the Service of the Marvelous, titled Raising the Stakes, Chicago surrealist Franklin D. Rosemont speaks on the social political climate of poetry. Within this text, he writes, "Poetry is endangered almost to the brink of extinction by a violent, totalitarian, spirit-crushing, life-threatening social order that is concerned exclusively with increasing the profit, power, and privilege of a tiny parasitical ruling class." He goes on to identify the 4 principles of the practice of poetry, as stated here, as a direct means to disarm miserabilism. He states that poetry is a source of knowledge and a method of knowledge. Poetry is audacity and insubordination. Poetry is a model for a better society. And poetry is an adventure and experience that makes all the difference in the world. In 1972, excuse me, the Chicago Surrealists organized the world's largest surrealist exhibition, actually in Chicago, which involved over 300 artworks from over 30 different countries across the globe. And the title of the show was Marvelous Freedom, Vigilance of Desire. And we kind of identified, me and my collective, that these 4 principles sort of represent that. Number 1 being the marvelous, number 2, freedom, number 3, vigilance, and number 4, desire. One of surrealism's signal contributions to critical theory is the concept of miserabilism, which gives us a framework for understanding is produced through the interplays of capital, patriarchy, and whiteness. Surrealism, as Rosemont reinforces, promotes the abolition of capitalism, the industrial, prison, pharmaceutical, and media complex, and genetic engineering, amongst other miseries, which are the result, as he believes, of globalization. Within that, he also identifies as miserabilism as a death grip that produces both misery and the idea of misery as the only. So I'm going to show you a little bit of my own projects that in one way or another, are kind of weaving themselves in and out of this discourse. I think some pieces are a little bit more successful than others. I'm not really going to speak much about the origins or how the work came to be. I'm just going to sort of show you all the slides, and maybe afterwards, ask questions. So these next 4 works are some pieces from a group show, a 2-person show that I did with artist Ronnie George. His family is of Palestinian descent, and we were really interested in bringing our interest in water. We're both triple water signs, both Cancers, Scorpio risings. So we were kind of really interested in to see what could happen if our works, our two practices existed in a space. So this is the piece title that I did for the show, titled Eagle Landing, Part 2, The Atlantic. It's just a laminated inkjet print with obsidian rock, paying homage to the historical site of Eagle Landing in southern Georgia, which was a site in which dozens of Nigerian slaves committed suicide in the Atlantic Ocean or in the shores of Georgia in revolt against slavery. A couple other pieces from the show. This is an installation, actually two parts. There were 234 Gerbera daisies that I had placed. Fortunately, they wilted when I actually got around to documentation of them. But at one point they were alive. I think sort of the capturing of that time too is actually quite poignant, considering the subject matter. I placed these daisies in response to the kidnapping of the 234 or more Chibok girls and Nigerian schoolgirls back in 2015, 2014, I can't even remember. And then this was another piece called Crossing Over to the Other Side, which is very simple, just the engraving of this granite tube cell that was dated between 2012 and 2015, My Black Death. 2012 was the year that Trayvon Martin was killed. In 2015 was Sandra Bland, and both of those killings really hit me hard, and everything in between really hit me hard. But this piece right here really symbolizes just my response to those moments, and also my decision to kind of just leave that trauma and leave that pain behind. This is another piece within the show titled Flash of the Spirit, Du Bois' Veil. It was composed of over thousands of cowrie shells and feathers. Really interested in just the material properties of the shells and the feathers. The shells being objects that come from the water and the earth, and the feathers being objects that come from animals that take flight through the sky. Another piece within the show, tithe offerings for my ancestors, installation composed of a bunch of family photographs, collected records, some hand-beaded daisies, and collected bottles from the neighborhood. You probably recognize this image, so this is how that video that we initially saw initially came to be. This again was in response to the just rapid police killings that were coming into the media and just going viral. I wanted to compose photographs that I felt captured some aspects of my identity. All of these objects come from my own personal collection, either handed down to me or found. So this was Black Object, White Smoke, Test 2, and Test 5. As part of that exhibition, we also created a catalog, which I owe you a copy of. I'm so sorry.
I'll wait.
Which I was really happy about us being able to do for that. There's another window into that. So I'm sure you guys kind of see a frequent theme sort of emerging here, water. I'm really interested in these moments that happen within the natural landscape. They're really simple, but I love looking at moments out at the water when the sky hits the sea. It's just so beautiful to me, and
I'm always sort of imagining kind of what exists within that in-between space. So this is a collage that I had created last year. It's just kind of a exercise to kind of get me back dreaming and imagining within the studio. Part of that research, I was studying a lot of images of women across cultures throughout the world carrying objects on their heads. Last year, I was invited to perform for the show that was curated by Betsy Odom and Rafael Rivera, titled Bodywork at Loyola University. And part of this work involved a performance, which I'll show you here. But the performance was titled She Who Carries Weight. And I was thinking a lot about this, but this is what it turned out to be. I was thinking a lot about just the weight that women throughout the world have carried. And kind of in response to a more feminist perspective of the story of Atlas, who lifted the sky or held the sky on their shoulders for eternity as a Greek deity. So I wanted to kind of include or add my own take to that. So we're going to go through just a few slides of the documentation of the performance. RJ Eldridge took, I think are absolutely beautiful. Thank you, RJ. So hopefully you guys can appreciate that. Part of this performance, I put out a call to women just within my community to come dance or walk or perform with me in this piece, and I was able to, surprisingly, I received a generous response of over like 20 or 25 women. Ended up with 11, so there were 12 of us. And we choreographed together different gestures from the gallery at Loyola University to the waterfront. And you can kind of see within the documentation this trail of people that were following us. And again, these materials, the cowrie shells, the bird feathers, these are things that keep coming up for me. The head objects are actually wig stands, which I really love the use of those busts because the wig stand definitely has a symbolic and a very special place within my own personal background. I grew up since I was a child watching my grandmother, even though she has absolutely beautiful hair, put on wigs to go to work every morning. So I am always reminded of that whenever I see these objects. But to me, they also serve as crowns. I really liked just those intersections. When we actually got to the waterfront, I invited the participants to just say out loud the name of the women who were coming to surface, as if it were a prayer or whatever, just whoever was on their thoughts. So we left that at the waterfront. And made our way back to the gallery.
So much better than whatever that is, Beatles.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. Wow. This is a group photo. Okay. Yeah, so this was a piece in response to my first attempt for the Ijele mask, all indigo dyed, hand painted, entirely constructed by myself, and some generous support from my mother at Coe College and Cedar Rapids, Iowa last year.
4 quadrants. You have the serpent. I didn't include the silhouette or any doll figures within this one. I might try to do it for the next one, but the patterns within here, of course, represent uses of the incivity symbolism that's used within the Kara cloth that we saw with the Jagam leopard society. It also has embedded in it symbols that I've created on my own that kind of represent the different matriarchs within my family. Titled If Allah, Chi, and Ike lived under the same roof, or if heaven was home. And those are all different words of God in Igbo. So these are this is a window into my studio. A little bit of my process, some of the books and things that I'm reading right now. I just wrapped up a show. It's Home and Community Center, Home and Square Community Center in Chicago, that included the use of, it's like a collaboration between me and my great grandfather who passed away. These are all his photographs, dating as far back to the 19s, maybe older than the 1960s. But he had a very extensive photographs that he took. So I used a combination of that and these cyanotype prints to create, and I'm sorry about the really bad documentation. This is what happens when you don't have an assistant. The combination of these textiles that I had hand painted and hand dyed in indigo, some of his photographs, and then next to these panels. Again, really bad documentation, I apologize, but this is a combination of his images and cyanotype prints that I made of the family's archive on the shelves inside. That's all I got for y'all. Thank you.
Are you done? You want to take some questions? How do you feel?
I am definitely happy to take some questions. I think that was a lot. I'm sure maybe there are some questions. I know there's questions. I know it's hot in here too. So if we need like a 5-minute break and first and back, it's that.
I don't care. I'll do it.
It takes breaks in it.
Yeah, if we take a break, it's over.
All right. So, question. Comment. Hi.
I was curious if you tend to indigo like maybe continuously or like that's part of your practice.
Yeah. Indigo is. I just recently, as of last year, self-taught myself how to work in indigo, natural indigo dye. I don't use synthetic dye. I go through the full process in my tiny ass studio. I'm also learning to work with other natural dyes, Alphanet, cochineal, work with Osage orange not too long ago. But this color, indigo, is one that I refer to a lot because traditionally throughout West Africa, indigo is considered a universal color. And so just with my interest within cosmology and sort of this exploration of the self, my family and community, I like that this color blue can kind of be a unifier to those concerns. I did learn though through this actual master indigo dyer, his name is Abubakar Fofana, and he's from Mali, that in Mali, a true master of the indigo dye process needs to go through 3 cycles of 7 years working with indigo and be able to render all 12 steps of the indigo shades. So I've only been working in this process for 2, so I still have a long way to go if I'm to be considered a master traditional.
That's a goal.
Yes, most
Work.
definitely. Hi.
Hey, so as you said, it's honestly,
Yeah.
and our library, life and history. I was just wondering what you thought, specifically, or
I think it's a little combination of both. I'm definitely not rendering things entirely within the traditional sense, mainly because even though I am half Nigerian, I've never been to Nigeria before. No one taught me how to do these things. So my process is not entirely traditional in that regard, right? But as I've dived deeper in my own research and just kind of followed my intuition through this process, I've realized just these little synchronicities that have been popping up. I didn't know that indigo was considered a universal color until I went to Abubakar's talk only maybe 2 or 3 months ago. Um, the use of cowrie shells, I've always been attached to because I have early memories of those objects in my childhood whenever my father or my uncles or family from Nigeria brought back gifts. We would get little bracelets that had cowrie shells on them. So I was just always really attached to those objects. But um, it's believed across a couple of different communities that cowrie shells, or just the use of the shell period, is a protector or encapsulation of the spirit. So there's this prayer that the Congo recite when someone passes away. It's also, you can see if you go to any old burial sites within the South, they cover their gravestones in shells as well as a protector of those who have passed. But there's a prayer that goes something like, as long as you live, um, keep me or something, so that you will guide my spirit. I'm butchering it. I'm totally butchering it, but it's actually really beautiful and a really poetic gesture, and it's just a way. I think of that gesture as a way to sort of, for me, it's a way of coping with loss. It's a way of kind of coping with physical trauma that the body may sort of carry or experience within the physical realm, and a way of kind of extending these other aspects of ourselves that are totally invisible to the rest of the world, right? Like we, even though our bodies die, our memories of people last forever, right? And so to put that intention out into the world was something to me that's really powerful about that. So I'm really attached and drawn to different moments and practices. These things.
So, it's because I know that you're doing that research about surrealism in the Caribbean and in Martinique in particular. I'm wondering, so I can't remember who the quote that you read about surrealism being a way of accessing, so from European modernism, accessing uh, another way, and through that getting to mystical, magical, and other ways of thinking about the world. So this kind of circling back. when you're doing, yeah, when you're doing, and it says like, so the African, the traditional African never lost it.
Yeah.
Right? When you're doing research, where do you, maybe it's a matter of nomenclature or category, but where do you draw the line then of whether you think of a practice as a surrealist practice? Does it have to have gone through modernism then for you to think about it as a surrealist practice,
No,
or versus a,
no, it doesn't have to go through modernism for me. Like I interpret this quote as it's saying that always existed adjacently to modernism. So like while modernism sort of kind of emerged, this thing was still happening, but also happening before that. And so, um, agreeing with this quote, I'm very invested in kind of the ancient or the old ways. I don't necessarily. I think when we're talking about writing, right, that would definitely be in the written word. That would definitely be a form where I have to rely on modernism. This is something that the Martinican surrealists are interrogating all the time. You know that the separation between the Antillean sort of culture versus their ancestral origins, and how do you negotiate in that? And then also for myself, right? Like I sit on both sides too. I have my feet. I was born here, right? But there's so much of my spirit that is wanting to go home, you know. So I like to kind of play with both of those realms and almost like a magician in my own right, kind of use them to my own kind of.
I really appreciate that way of kind of not negating, but sidestepping the whole modernist approach to surrealism, which historically and still today was taken from African aesthetics. Like your way of sidestepping it is really interesting to me because like you have to acknowledge that it exists, and Chica does this here when he says surrealism and Black African art. He's grouping them together in a kind of an seemingly innocuous way, but I feel like you go the next step and like you're saying not only that African art is the source of modernist surrealism, but also that modernist surrealism is like not as useful. It's still trapped in this reductive, conceptual, intellectual approach, and it's not. I mean, it's useful for white people. I mean, it's important. Right?
Yeah.
And like I was reading. Which answer am I sorry?
No, keep going. Keep
Oh,
going.
sure.
Yeah.
I was reading this anthology, Black, Beige, Black,
Brown,
Brown, and Beige,
Yeah.
kind of in preparation for this and thinking exactly about what you're talking about, like the canonical issue where poetry and written language, which is kind of like the engine of modern Western surrealism,
Yep.
it allows like an erasure of the ancestral and ongoing surrealism that you mean, like interior ancestral surrealism that is inborn to people from Africa and the diaspora, right? So like I just love the way that you sidestep it. Like you have to acknowledge it, but you can just go around it.
I think what else, kind of in response to both of these comments, I think about, even though I wasn't there, just that moment, that magical moment when Andre Breton, French writer and surrealist, made his way to Martinique and met the Césaires. Like, the Césaires, they didn't necessarily have a term for what it was that they were participating in beyond negritude, but when they met Andre, they were like, this is also us, right? And kind of mobilized a whole community based off of that first meeting. So I'm interested in that moment too, like how kind of oppositional forces or the way that we might traditionally perceive them, how they can work together.
I mean, it has to be like it's notable that surrealism is the only instance of modernism that has Black and brown people in its canon. Right? So I just feel like even if it has a colonial relationship to African surrealism, it's better than Dada or something, or like Cubism, right? I don't know. I just appreciate the way you did that.
Hey,
Hi. I'm curious, along the lines of poetry, do you write any poetry yourself and put it in with your work, your visual work at all? And if you do, can we read that?
follow me on Instagram. That's where I post a lot of my writing right now. If it does take on poetic form, it's something that I used to practice a lot before I entered college. That's interesting to me. So I'm trying to get back to that space. It's been kind of emerging over the last year, but slowly.
I'll follow you on
Finding Ijoma.
Okay.
With an underscore. There's an underscore somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sort of have one thought. I love that, or it strikes me as interesting that the interest in cyanotypes is taking this like beautiful blue, those kinds of like formal concerns, and the photographic legacy of your family and involving the cosmic, like involving that activity. If you visualize that process at all, or how you conceptualize that. The cyanotypes, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I started. So this is another process that I taught myself how to do. I didn't buy cyanotype paper, but I made the solution myself and made the negatives, if you will. They're kind of, I mean, they're okay. They're not the best, but I mainly was interested in the cyanotype uses of the cyanotype for those two concerns that you kind of mentioned. For one, the connection to photography, and other, the connection to color. But there's no ritual really involved in this work. I think the use of images in these panels will definitely have another life at the Ditch Project show. So you'll get to experience that if you go.
When is it open?
November 9th is the opening reception. Yeah, I'll be there for the full week. Yeah.
In Springfield or
In Eugene.
I don't know if it could.
No, it's in Springfield, but they call it Eugene for political
actually
reasons. Yeah,
Okay.
Springfield is part of Eugene in one sense, but also separate in a different sense. Kind of like St. John's in Portland, if you're familiar.
Okay.
it's precedent.
Yeah, it is confusing.
I'll find out tomorrow, actually.
Towns
I'm gonna
expand
go
and like
there.
they suck
Yeah.
small towns, you know. Those little towns still maintain their independence and sense of identity. So are these? Can we talk about these symbols?
Yeah. So these symbols are called Nsibidi, which are also practiced in the southeastern region of Nigeria, where my father's people come from. Amongst the secret society, the Ijana Leopard Society exercises these symbols. There's two forms of it: forms of love and forms of war or conflict. These are all nice symbols because I want to bring that energy into space. But yeah, all of them obviously have their own meaning. Usually, when you see the eye shape, that represents an individual of some kind. The So, like moments when you see the sort of semicircles crossed or union, that represents two people, love, marriage, sex, children. There's different orientations of this, but it's generally the same thing. Feminine, masculine, male, female. Actually, I think it's the other way around. I fall in and out of remembering what each and every single one of them mean. Part of the reason why I keep kind of writing these is to inscribe that memory and that knowledge of what all of them mean. This symbol, for example, that I have tattooed here represents water. This is a leaf. Drum up here. This is cosmos or spirit. This one up here is blessing, cosmos, shooting star. This is either heart or desire. When you see kind of these railroad track looking things, it's usually journey or path of some kind. This is also heart. But yeah, they all have different meanings. They're kind of like an alphabet, and I'm kind of just like vomiting them out right now, not in any particular arrangement or order, but eventually, as I come to know them a little bit more, I would like to be able to do that.
What else are you gonna do while
Go home. Tomorrow, yeah, I go to Ditch for just the day, and then I return later that fly out 7 in the morning. So my time, I mean, I've been here for like 5 days, but yeah. Thank you all.